Hey guys, so somebody should switch presentation here. I think Niklas just got out of the room to find some other people that are probably still enjoying lunch. So my name is Tony Verspecht. I work for Cisco for about 19 years in various roles and disciplines. So the last 4 years I've been instrumental in driving the partner program forward for all things related to automation, more specifically to NSO, together with my partner in crime, Roach. So, and we are very honored this afternoon to do a panel session with some of our most promising partners around the journey to automation. Right, so I'll show quickly the agenda. So this is the agenda. So first of all, I'll do a quick introduction. It's going to take about 5 to 7 minutes. Then we're going to move to the partner panel interaction. So we have 6 experts, people and partners involved in doing NSO deployments with customers. They're going to go over some of their specific use cases, their experiences, their expertise that they've been doing with customers. We're going to have then a small break, short break, to get re-energized. Often that happens after lunch, that people, their stomachs starts to work and it drains energy. So we're going to give you the opportunity to have a small coffee. And then we're going to get back for further partner interactions. And after yet another short break, you're going to have the opportunity to do tabletop discussions with all of the partners, including Cisco AS, obviously, at the back of the room. So please go and visit those guys. These are the experts. If you have any question around any use case that you might have encountered around NSO, these guys, they know the answers to that. Okay. So that's going to be followed by a Pronghorn demo and also a demo from Netrounds, 2 of our Solution Plus partners that have been very complementary to what we do with NSO. And then I'll finish this session this afternoon with some closing points. Okay. So I would like to welcome now our
Chairman.
Panel experts. Come on, guys. Come on stage. Take a seat. And I'll quickly go one by one. If the thing is, if you're going to let them introduce themselves, we're going to be here the entire afternoon with introductions. We don't want that to happen. This is Boštjan Šuštar from Dell. He's one of the senior architects from Dell, a top expert. Really very instrumental in all things we are doing with NSO. This is Dirk, director of the expert team of Devoteam, based in Germany. So they have been doing great work with NSO. Christopher Wade, CTO from Itential. So you see the various levels, architect, director, CTO. The higher you go up into the organizational level, the shorter the title becomes. You have noticed that? CTO. And there's a very specific reason why this guy sits in the middle. We're going to find out later. Stefan Vallin from Netrounds. Okay, so Netrounds is one of our Solution Plus partners. We are doing great business with them, and Stefan is going to elaborate on that a bit further. Manish Jain from Cisco AS. He has been driving forward a lot of projects with our customers on NSO, also on other automation platforms that we have. And he's one of those experts, and he's leading a very strong team in that area. And then we have Scott Barvick from Ductus out of US. He's also one of the first partners that came on board as soon as we started the partner program about 4 years ago, Jim, I think. So today we have 62 partners globally that are experts in this domain. So there's more partners in the room. I think today in these developer days we have about 12 partners joining. But these are the experts that we have invited to elaborate on the expertise and the work that they have been doing. Okay, so this is going to be the flow of the agenda. So we're going to give 15 minutes to each partner. We have some buffer, but we're going to try to keep it very time constrained. 15 minutes open conversation, discussion for each partner to elaborate on the use cases they have been doing. Note that all of those partners, they're not constrained by any use case. They have a broad set of expertise that you guys can leverage on. So 15 minutes, we will welcome questions. So if you have any questions, please jump up, ask for the mic, and you get an opportunity to ask the question. For the guys and the people sitting at the top, you will need to shout. There's no mic there. John, you have a loud voice. You can shout. Thanks. So there's going to be more questions. If you can't cover them all, again, there you have an opportunity to do that at the tabletop or this evening when we're going to all be all together at the dinner in the museum. One thing that I would like to say, and thanks again for all the partners, they are funding the dinner this night. So guys, thanks a lot for making that funding available to us. So as we are having the discussions, about 10 minutes in each discussion, we're going to do the Metis stuff. And you're now getting full experts into this. So we're going to ask one question with a set of multiple choice answers. Please react on that. It's an opportunity for you to learn as well as for us to learn. So let's get that done. Results will be shown interactively, and you can download the reports and outcome of that polling later. And why is that moving?
Yeah, in front of you. Yep, no worries.
That was just a trial. So short breaks, as I said before. So after the break, come back in. You don't want to miss any sort of valid opportunity to discuss and ask questions with experts. Okay. One thing, journey to automation, before I start the interaction with the panel session. The journey automation, it's for every company a different thing. We know that as we are engaging with customers, it's first of all sometimes difficult to find where to start. What is the best opportunity to get going? It's not always so straightforward. Often the executives that are providing you the budget with, they don't know, they need to be convinced. So it's not an easy thing. But there's many opportunities for each company to get going on automation. The journey itself is different for every company. Right? So, and the journey, it takes time. It's not something that you're going to be able to finish over a year. It's 2 years, 3 years, sometimes 4 years, depending on the size of the company, the complexity that you have to deal with, the opportunities of automation. It's very important to note that automation, and Colin Kincaid, the VP, my boss, said it at the start, it's very important to focus not only on cost reduction and avoidance, focus also on those things that will increment revenue, that are improving cash flow, drive top line. Because that's the way you're going to be sustainable in the business. Cost cutting as an end. Once the costs are cut, you're done. Right? It's about focusing on growth. And that's what automation and the principle of modularity can assist you with. But so, having that said, I think we can go into the panel discussions. So, this is a short overview of what each of the panel members and experts will cover. So, we're going to start off with Nil, with Boštjan, who is going to cover a very specific use case, which has to do with network and service migration. Right, so we have prepared a few questions to get the conversations going. I will go on with the first question. And as we are going forward, I would like you guys to ask also the questions that you believe are important to get answers to. Okay, so we will get then into data Ductus, the Devoteam, Itential, Netrounds, and then also Cisco as at the last. And you can see each one of the use cases that I will cover. Okay, again, these guys, they can cover much more than those use cases shown in the table. Okay, there's many use cases that we have done with customers. There's only that amount of use cases we can cover in this short amount of time. So we're going to get going right now. So, one also thing. So I worked on my presentation until 1 o'clock this morning. Closed the lid, nicely down. I woke up at 6 o'clock this morning, trying to power up my laptop. Guess what? Black screen. Crashed. I don't know why. Maybe automation. Right, so the first question that I would like to ask to Boštjan. So Boštjan, what do you think are the most common reasons for considering migration of services or from one device to another or one network to another?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the idea for this is actually coming from our customers. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we came up with this use case and started positioning it, but I guess it's true for most service providers and enterprises that they have a bunch of equipment that's actually doing a pretty good job, but eventually, as it ages, the problems start arising. The vendor that initially produced the box stops supporting it because there's new technology out. Yep. So once the device gets end of life, end of support, end of everything, then you start running into a problem of, what when things starts going wrong. So you don't get any hardware replacement, you don't get new software, bug fixes, new features, stuff like that. So that can be a tremendous risk for the business. So they are aware of that. Or sometimes with certain companies, it is just replacing the vendor. So either case, you know that you have to do something about it. You have to do a migration, but it actually poses a huge risks to perform the migration. So there are also a lot of issues that can arise when you start doing the migration and how you're going to do the migration. So those are mostly the challenges that are presented when starting to think about the migration.
Does this resonate well with you guys? Is migration of services from one device to another, is that something that you see as an issue?
Or if there are any other reasons that you might want to consider migration. Or maybe if we can do a show of hands, who actually has this challenge today that needs to perform some migration? Okay, a few hands.
That's about 50% of the room.
Eventually everyone gets there. Once your equipment is 10 years old, that's a lot today, right?
Yeah.
So more or less those are the reasons.
Yeah. So if a company thinks about migration, so what have you seen as being the biggest challenges to get that done? And which team is impacted most and
the operations teams. So typically it falls onto the operations teams that they have to perform the migration. So eventually the order comes down from above. But on the other hand, we like status quo. The boxes are still working fine, so why change it? But we just said that there are certain risks that we need to manage. So the biggest problems when deciding to go for the migration is the actual complexity. So imagine you have in a service provider environment huge boxes with huge number of service instances. So it's complexity, and then once you understand that it's a pretty complex job, how long it's going to take. So if you build a plan and you know that it might span years. So we are not talking about days, weeks, we are talking about years that will take to migrate maybe several thousand devices. So complexity and time, and then how we are going to do it. If we do it manually, it's definitely in years. If we are going to start building some scripts to do it, okay, what if things go wrong? So if things go wrong, the typical problem with automation is that if you make a mistake manually, it's one problem. If you automate stuff and you make a mistake, you will multiply it by several times. So once you consider all that, again, you're just wasting time. You're losing time, and that's basically those technical challenges that we face when trying to decide for how to migrate.
So a migration means obviously, you have installed maybe a new device or new network, and that is owned by maybe network engineering or engineering department, so they made a cost for that. And then it's up to operations to make sure that those services can be transferred from or migrated from one environment to another.
That's correct,
and that requires also some budget, and then the VP of operations needs to make sure that he can spend the money on that.
So as the slide says, we like status quo, so we prefer to do what we've always done, because whenever you have to do something extra, typically operations teams are already burdened with the daily operations of the environment. And then the other option was, building some type of a migration strategy. And the one that we are talking about is really trying to leverage the capabilities of NSO as the framework, on top of which we can really create a reliable and fast mechanism to perform migration from an old device to a new device.
Yeah, so where specifically in the process do you see automation to be enabled, and with a solution like NSO, where do you see that happening in the process?
Well, it depends. So as I said, there are many different environments, different requirements. So we actually sort of so far identified two ways of doing the migration. One, actually, for lack of a better name, we called one device migration, the other one service migration. Mm-hmm. So maybe on the next slide, if you move to the next slide. So yeah, as I said, for lack of a better name, the device migration really sort of focuses on taking NSO as a framework that is capable of delivering configurations. So what we do is, I would say, on the spot service discovery. So we grab the configurations from the source device and try to perform that translation into whatever the new platform is. So it can be from the same vendor, from a different vendor. And as we perform this device migration, we usually focus on the physical part. So when you do a device migration, we are really talking about grabbing that port of the configuration that reflects to a certain physical part. So usually that would be an interface, for example. So maybe you're not going to do the entire migration of the entire device because it may have hundreds of interfaces. So again, you want to do it in a controlled manner. So you say, okay, let's migrate one interface from the old device to the new device. But that one interface might be hosting, several thousand of service instances, which we don't know that they are service instances. So for us, they are just a bunch of configuration lines on the device. Yep. So with that device migration approach, we really, for instance, take a look at all of the sub-interfaces, try to identify all of the dependencies, like routing, static routing, BGP, VRFs, whatever the services are. So in essence, this is on-the-fly service discovery. And then you take that information and you push it onto the destination device. And one idea here is that it should be very simple to execute. So if we go interface by interface, we only get a few parameters that we need to enter for the operation to be executed. Yep. So that's one. The other one is service migration. Now, as the name suggests, here we do service discovery upfront. So we perform, that dreaded archaeology that we were talking about in one of the other sessions. So you have to do a service discovery upfront. You aim for 100% accuracy, of course. And once you do have all the services discovered and in CDB, then it gets very easy to do the migration. So you just take service instances and change the device, change the interface, and NSO will take care of the rest. Of course, we are still talking about a physical migration. So we are taking an interface, plugging it from one device into another, or maybe just redirecting layer 2 traffic, whatever is the environment. But we need some way of a helper application that will identify all those sub-interfaces or whatever they are that depend on that physical interface. So again, from the perspective of the operator who will be executing the migration, it's a few parameters, and a migrate button is clicked, and that's it. Yep. So maybe, I'm not sure if you have another question, but I have another slide where this is sort of illustrated as the simplicity of the user interface. So a few parameters, and then of course the action may take, depending on the complexity, it may take a few minutes. But alongside with that, we also have certain verifications, so pre-checks, post-checks. If a certain instance will fail in the migration, we can identify it. We can provide configuration diffs so that maybe a few instances will require still human interaction, but all the data that is provided to the operator makes it easy for them to identify what would be that exceptional use case. Yep. So, but all the logic is actually built in NSO. So this is just an example of a front end. But of course, that could have been replaced by, for instance, Promcore from Itential, yep, or Ductus also has a yep, similar product that can be used on top. So if there is an existing OSS BSS system, we can integrate it with that. So this one just represents a dedicated front end that makes it easy for operators to execute migrations and also to be able to see the results. So see the success rates, see the configurations, the original ones, the new ones, the diffs, if needed. So yep, that's
so. And guys, they can view what you have developed later on the tabletop, so you can demonstrate it in more detail.
So if there are any questions, you can ask them now, or we'll be back there.
Yeah. So maybe time for the Menti, Jim. What do you think?
Yep, I think so. We've got about 5 more minutes. Frederick, if you could share first.
So guys, this is please get onto Menti and read the question and select your answer. So guys, can you get access on Menti? Is something wrong? Okay, now we are getting responses in, thanks. Yeah, we see the responses coming in, Boštjan. So it looks like the first one is actually the most compelling reason for people to.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to achieve. So trying to really make it easy, make it fast, so that we can complete it in a relatively short amount of time, and of course with minimum errors, because every migration is risky. Just by doing the migration, you might cause some downtime, but if things go horribly wrong, there's one thing that we also have. You can always do a rollback. So, and then try to identify the root cause why a certain migration failed. And of course, it's also important to have a bunch of checks. So on the slide that you've seen earlier, you select a device and a source interface, the destination device, destination interface. Of course, there's also a chance of the operator entering the wrong data. So you don't want to migrate onto an interface which already has configuration. So all these kinds of checks have to be also in that migration tool set to really minimize the chances of having errors.
So guys, looking at this, I think, and from what Boštjan has been saying, so there's two compelling cost reasons as to why you can automate migration. So first of all is making sure that the process of migration is happening as seamlessly as possible and as efficiently as possible, which means reducing the amount of manual tasks. And also by doing so, limiting the errors that could occur after the migration has been done, because every manual effort, and you all know this, you have been exposed to this situation, can result in wrong configuration, in service instability, and so on. And so that's, if you're ever going to have a conversation with your VP or SVP of operations, and he thinks about cost avoidance for migration, this is the most compelling reason, okay? So from the panel session, anything you want to say, guys?
Think about a byproduct of the migration. We talked to a few customers, and migration, as it is explained, right? Migration has its own business reason. But think about, as you are doing service migration, you're doing all the hard work by writing that service logic. Now, service logic is already written. Day 2, next month, you can use the same service logic to onboard new services. So the same work which you did for migration can be used for provisioning services. So that's a byproduct of migration use case.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, Scott.
And similarly, we've had one project where they were doing device migration, one older box to a new box, actually a different type. And but the infrastructure that was built was actually very useful for migrating. It's kind of like service migration, but one box and just changing the, basically bundle ethers to, GIGs and sub interfaces. So there's a whole bunch of infrastructure. A byproduct can be, hey, you're going from one thing to another, and you have all the checks and all the, and all the other logic and the rollback and all that stuff. So, not only is it good for the actual migration, but then you can find other uses for it too.
Yeah, Tony, we have 1 more minute.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jim. Okay, so Stefan?
I have a short question. So when migrating the services, you talked about checks. How do you know that the service actually works after migration? I mean, it's more than the same config is copied. There is so much surrounding things that might impact. So, and Christian this morning talked a lot about testing. So how do you test that the service works?
Okay, so thank you. So maybe just the comment on the first thing. So I mentioned that there are two different types of migration strategies that we have implemented. So the first one is really just a migration. The second one with service discovery actually enables you to then also continue using NSO for orchestration of those services. But to answer your question, so basically in our case, we have through the configuration inside NSO, we can add whatever actions we can perform on the devices. So it's really the commands such as show commands, pings and stuff. So basically do it before the migration and after migration, because very often with the migration you will also find a lot of zombie services. So you will have some half-configured sub-interfaces, but they have not been functional for a long time. So with pre-checks you identify those, And with post checks, if you see that some additionals are not functional, you know that you have a problem. So it's not very advanced, but it does give you enough assurance that you know that if you're 99% successful, you're really good. So that 1% will be either a zombie configuration or something that has to be manually handled.
Thank you. And Tony, we're over time.
Yeah. So thanks, Jim. So
Yeah, Frederick, if we can go back.
I think Stefan was asking the question because there's a unique use case there that Netrounds can be added to the service migration to do the service validation and testing after it was migrated. So, which is another supplemental use case eventually. So now we can move on to the next use case, which is going to be from our friends from Ductus, Scott. So I think you're going to talk about workflow automation. And I have a first question for you. And I'll give you the mic. Right. So, so workflow automation, from what the discussion that we had already before, it means different things to different people. So can you elaborate on it, what it actually means, so that people get a much better understanding on it?
Exactly. In fact, that's what I wanted to discuss among the panel members in the audience was what is workflow. You know, as you can see, I basically put up a little, kind of silly little puzzle metaphor there to say, is it something where if you put all these pieces together on top of NSO, then it magically becomes workflow? And the answer is of course not. It's some kind of spectrum where, if you can go to the next slide.
Yep.
What I tried to do was say, what is workflow? We know that NSO is at the base. It has all these great features, from FastMap to the device catalog to working with the devices. But then, clearly, like you just heard, and I'm sure we're going to hear some more, you start to add things in NSO. You add actions to do things, and then the full capability of all the reactive FastMap and all the things you can do, in NSO starts as the base, and that's kind of at the bottom there. But then you start to add these other components to it when you need them, and you start to add, you can add Ansible, you can add other kind of tools in the toolkit as complexity of both the external requirements start to move from low to high, and then user requirements. Do I need to verify visually diffs? Do I need to do a rollback? Do I need to decide? Do I need to wait for a day? Do I need to wait for a cable move or something? So there's these two axes where the way I think about it, and I'm not even saying where workflow is in there. That's for us to decide. But as you start to add things, Ansible, you can blast out something fairly complex, in Ansible as well, even. But is that workflow? I don't know, maybe. And then as you build up, and clearly we've heard in many of these presentations, the very top, the OSSs, BSSs, is that workflow? Probably. But then somewhere in the middle, we're doing things, we're making decisions based on the customer needs, the tools they have available, the other things they're using. And somewhere up there, you have, Elk and Splunk, where you're getting things, the low code, no code options up into Communda and BPNM, and then the custom, and a pronghorn is in there, as well. So you're doing these things as tools, and then somewhere in there we get to decide what we call workflow.
Yep.
And I would probably put it somewhere at the top corner there, and but other people might have different opinions. We might make decisions different ways. Some people might not call it workflow at all. So that's really for us to decide. So if you can get next slide.
Yeah, I think it comes down again of removing a certain set of manual tasks out of a given process and make that seamlessly happening. So. Yeah.
Right, but even and to me, say just because I'm picking, I'm talking now, Ansible to me is not, the way I use it is not really workflow. That's just automation. But then if I go and add, the user interface, or if I have to wait for something, or take a day, or one port at a time, as you go forward, it takes a while. Then I start to call that workflow. We've done some projects where clearly that we have high user requirements, high complexity of interactions with external tasks. Resource allocators is one obvious one. Other things, user management, the actual allocation of the person who's going to do the work.
Yep.
Clearly, to me, that becomes workflow. That was one of them. Another one where we used another BPMN tool, actually built it on top, right in NSO, or as a application on top of NSO. That was another one. And then an analytics-based one for DDoS migration. I mean, a DDoS mitigation platform, where it was taking events into Splunk. Splunk was acting as the app server because we built some stuff on top of that, and then turned that around, gave a user interface, and this is for a service for DDoS mitigation.
Yeah.
And it would allow the user to select things to do, take a look at anomalies, make some decisions, and run their network that way. So
yeah. So Scott, what do you think would be the top 3 challenges, and thereby also the 3 critical success criteria that you would like to tell the audience to go back home with and tell their management as to be the most important things in workflow automation?
Yeah, I think it's really to pick the right tool. I mean, that's number one.
Yeah.
Without saying, I mean, you can't say in advance what the right tool is, but trying, at that moment in time, making the right architectural decision, and to pick the right one is the most important. Just because we use one on one project, we don't think it's the right one for the next project. You should be evaluating, and you should make sure you're picking the right one. Probably not over-engineering is another one. The right tool happens, I think, to be kind of almost a minimalist kind of thing, so that you're not kind of building in complexity. You're trying to do it, kind of in the most efficient way.
Yeah.
And then, then a third is actually all the things that we talked about yesterday, just in general automation terms. Get the buy-in, start small. It's basically building a good automation strategy, because to me, not all automation is workflow, but all workflow is automation, and you have to do all the core things right there.
Yeah. Okay. So from our panel members, do you see the same situation at your experience around workflow automation? Is that similar to what Scott just has? Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I guess I have a statement slash question. So, and Stefan and I had a few discussions on
Could you speak into the mic?
A number of years ago. So, it's my opinion. We've worked on this for a while. It's a little less about the state machine of the workflow, and it's more about how we integrate with NSO. So, if you respect the models out of Yang and you ingest those in such a way, you can narrow the number of workflows you need to accomplish the automation goals you have. So, I'm not sure if you've seen this, Scott, but I guess I would ask back. The goal is to ingest Yang so that basically you're not building a one-for-one mapping of workflows to your automation use cases. So you can, as you scale your automations with NSO, you don't have to, in linear scale, do that with workflows, right? So ultimately, we're looking about how do we integrate with NSO in such a way that we're not building a candy shell on top. We've built this great modeling framework. You need to be able to ingest that so the northbound systems can leverage that for the decision making. So it's a little bit tangential to workflow, but I think we get hung up sometimes on the state machine, and the question really boils down to me is how do we integrate with NSO most appropriately to leverage kind of what we built into the system.
Yeah. Okay. Any other takers?
So I would just put a data point. Workflow is also an art, not just a science. The reason I say that is ultimately the users are the operations team, and they are used to use a tool in a consistent way that they have been using for the last so many years. I mean, if we believe that north-south interaction between NSO and devices is complex, think about how complex will be east-west, integrations or workflows. So capturing the requirements, capturing how the UI looks, that's a very important aspect, right? Doing the wireframes, getting the documents, all the processes document is a very important best practice when you think about automating the workflows.
Good point. Thanks a lot, Manish. So is it time for Menti, Jim?
Yeah, we're about halfway through. I think,
yep.
Frederick, if we could have the next Menti question.
All right, guys, go into Menti, look at the question, and provided answers. responses are getting slowly in, and seems that the mix is at the moment the most selected one.
And that would be consistent with, you know, the axes I picked, you know, because essentially in order to be high on one, you know, high on the complexity of either of those two, you'd have, you know, you probably have a mix of both.
Yeah. So what do you think about the responses there? We are not considering workflow automation. Is that like a snapshot in time, or has it been already solved, or there's no need for it? I'd like to maybe a question from the tabletop.
Yeah, I'd love to have a question from the question or input from the audience. You know, it's interesting. We had a comment this morning to the gentleman from Italy, you know, using pronghorn, and that was, you know, a very good question. How are you deciding? I think, you know, I think even Chris said it. How are you finding the interaction, or how are you defining the interaction between NSO and the workflow? And, you know, there was one answer, but I think that's, you know, that's the big question. And, you know, respecting the models, you know, just like Boštjan said, you know, doing a lot, you know, in actions in NSO. I mean, leverage NSO all you can, and then, you know, either, you know, using the models or respecting the models, and you know, then using a relatively simple northbound interface down to it. Maybe you're not calling it workflow. I mean, maybe that's what, you know, my interpretation of that could be. But if you had other reasons, like, hey, no, we're fine, you know, some Ansible scripts and automation and you know, some things like we saw from Deutsche Telekom this morning, you know, was really good. Maybe that's not workflow; it's just really superior automation.
Yeah. Okay, so any other takers from the panel on the workflow?
We got about 4 more minutes. So.
Yeah,
guys. Yeah.
I'll make a short one, and I will take my previous tail F hat on. So it's interesting to see sort of the focus getting more and more these days on workflows, and we had several good examples where workflows makes perfect sense north of NSO, where you have sort of set of sequential actions, waiting, you have users, etc. So there's perfect spot for workflow engines north of NSO, no doubt. However, a little bit of warning flag: be smart and don't use workflow engines in the wrong place. When we one Monday morning created NCS at tail F, the whole market then was called service activators. All of them were workflow based. So every service activator like 2010 was a workflow engine touching the network. All of them failed. None of them worked. So that's why we did in NSO Service Manager totally forbidding workflow engines touching the network.
Yeah.
And we had to educate the market. We had to educate the market for years that workflow engines should not touch the network. And people sort of stared at us, but we see now it worked. So a bit of warning flag: don't push the workflow engine too close to the network. Don't replace the service manager with a workflow engine. Big no-no there. Just a bit of warning from my side.
Yeah, very good comment, Stefan. Thanks a lot. I think we are still having a few minutes left on this one. So if there is any further questions on workflow automation, guys, go to any of the panel members. Get started with Scott. You can elaborate further on this use case. I think we can maybe move to the next use case discussion.
Yep, we can. And Frederick, if...
Thanks a lot, Scott.
Let me go back.
So the next one is Dirk here from our Devoteam partner. So Dirk, I think you're going to cover NFEO orchestration. NFEO orchestration, yes. So
yes.
Yeah, the first question that I got for you is, from the work that you are doing with customers, what are the kind of the best practices that you have seen so far around NFE orchestration and NFE management? Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. So I think let's first start with a brief view on...
It's on, just a little bit closer.
Okay, let's first start with a brief look at the state of NFE, of the NFE market and NFE Mano. Well, what we see is that this market is still fragmented and immature. This has an impact on the strategies of service providers, how they implement NFE, and also on the benefits of NFE. So currently what we see is that a number of service providers struggle to realize the benefits of NFV in terms of time to market with new services and cost reductions. Further, we see a strong demand for open solutions where different VNF vendors can play with mono stacks, or where mono stacks can be combined from different vendors. So interoperability is a universal requirement and very important for service providers. And this is where NFV still struggles. So standardization has made quite impressive progression in recent years. The same is true for interoperability, but there are still a number of aspects that are under standardization. For example, the APIs between the different Mano components have been just, the specifications have been just released and updated by the end of the year. If you look at the recent ETSI NFE and OP NFE Plugfest, you see that there's basic interoperability for lifecycle operations, for multi-VIM integration, but that there's still a lack in terms of more advanced features. And if we talk about use cases, one example is for 5G network slicing, where we see additional requirements, additional architecture options needed to really bring forward NFV. Forward to the next slide. So on this slide, on the right side, just a brief refresher on the NFE high-level architecture on the Mano stack. So there's a hierarchical structure. So on the top, you have the NFE orchestrator, including catalog and inventory functions. We had earlier this morning a session about the NFEO function pack for NSO, which realizes the orchestration logic for NFEO and providing the capabilities to have a catalog with specifications for the VNF descriptors, the network service descriptors, as well as for the records for VNFs and VNF instances and network services instances. Then you have the VNF manager, which interacts with the different VNFs. So instantiates them and does all the lifecycle operations. And on the bottom layer, you have the virtual infrastructure manager, which manages the NFE infrastructure. Yep. And on the next slide, we will see how Cisco NSO maps to the different Mano components. So on the top layer, you have Cisco NSO together with the NFEO function pack, and below you have the Elastic Services Controller. So in terms what is needed by customers, we see a strong demand for open solutions, for flexible solutions. So as mentioned, the market is still fragmented. Even service providers created a number of open source projects. So where do you invest? There's a huge activity on one side. On the other side, you have a number of solutions in the market, and there's no clear leader, or there's still a lot of confusion which way to go. So what we see when we talk to service providers, the smaller ones, let's say tier 2, tier 3 providers, they have more a wait and see approach. Mm-hmm. Others, the tier 1 service providers, they have on one side, they are looking into open source projects, they are looking into do it yourself to a certain level, but they have to rely also on service providers. And on the other hand, to move ahead with NFV, to get experience, especially what the operation guys are afraid of, that engineering comes up with NFV, but they have no experience how to deal with it. That is where we see that many of the large providers start with NFV for specific use cases. So, for example, very much like the VMS platform, to use NFV for cloud VPN or for SD-WAN or virtual CPE, and to start in a specific domain. So, and to add another domain. So what you end up, or may end up, is multiple monostacks.
Yep.
And on one hand, you move forward with NFV. On the other hand, this blocks also the benefits. So the idea behind of NFV is to go cross-domain. So
yep.
to have a number of layers for operation, and then to transform also the operational model. So, and if you still stick to the silos, as in the past years, you won't be able to realize the benefits. On the other hand, to get experience, it's one option. So, and what we see is that service providers move ahead, but in a controlled way. So to realize certain use cases, even with different monostacks, to get experience. But in the long run, of course, there will be consolidation.
They will consolidate, yeah.
And further, if you look at new use cases such as 5G, network slicing, there will be even more complex architectures, including multi-provider scenarios where you need orchestrator of orchestrator and things like that.
Yeah. So you said that engineering in some of the cases that you have been exposed to is coming up with some of the NFEO instantiations in an isolated way, not talking to the operational guys.
Not talking
and that's a big risk, obviously.
That's a big issue, and what we also see is that, for example, another hot topic is VNF onboarding. It's still highly manual, and there are a number of issues. So what I'm interested in is how important is for you, the audience, pre-tested VNFs, ecosystem of VNFs, kind of app store for VNFs, to simplify onboarding of VNFs, to offload testing activities from service providers to vendors or ecosystems.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I think that's covered by some of the Menti questions later on, but hopefully the guys can come to your tabletop later so that you can get more interesting conversation ongoing on that. So any of the other panel members, experts that would like to elaborate a bit on NFEO and FEM? That sounds like a very surrounding
observation, and I want to ask a question, right? How many of you have kind of an NFV automation in your environment, or even a hybrid? And the reason I ask this question is coming from Americas. When we started automation journey with NSO, in Americas we saw a lot of physical devices automation, process automation, right? But in APJC, like Japan and all, we saw a lot of NFV automation. So I just want to ask, how many of you are dealing with virtualization and NFV automation versus hybrid versus only physical?
So maybe we need to split up the question and so we can see hands being raised.
Yeah, so how many of you are seeing virtual like NFV automation in your environment?
About 10 people out of 80, 90.
Yeah. And just physical?
Almost a double.
Thank you.
Yeah. So 10 versus 20%, guys.
So I guess my observation or question, or where my thoughts go on this one is, if we can make the NFEO package, so good and even better, because I'm using it in another project, and and I've heard many, at least 3 or 4 others talk about using it. So if that's the driver that gets all of this stuff going, is that getting the attention that it needs? And I'm not saying it's not. It's just, it seems like that could be the real thing that really drives NSO applications into NFE, is making sure that that application has all the features that are required to make everything, all the automation for it, really, really easy.
Yeah, very good point, Scott. Yes. So maybe time for the Menti session.
I think so. Frederick, if we can go into Menti. Yeah, we get about maybe 4 more minutes.
Yeah, so guys, again, please go on to Menti, read the question and provide your answers. Thank you. It's a little bit of contest between skills of engineers and then the thing that you just said, Dirk, the lack of a mature, interoperable NFE mono solution.
Pretty evenly split.
So how do you see those, as the responses are building up, how do you see those, from your experience, Dirk, those two going hand in hand? Because if you lack skills, it's maybe more difficult to select the right solution or develop the right solution.
Yeah, I think lack of skills, what I learned from a number of discussions with service providers, especially operations teams, they are really sometimes afraid about NFE because they have no experience, they are not involved in building the NFE solutions, so they have to take what engineering will provide. And I think here, let's say, more open approach, DevOps approach, where people from the planning, engineering, operations department will be involved, could help to minimize this. On the other hand, there's lack of skills, I think, also in engineering type departments, especially if you look at the current state. And if you look, for example, at some open source efforts, those will require even more activity, engagement by the service provider. So I don't see how, let's say, smaller service providers can really move forward using the current tools. So I think this has to be simplified to really make NFE to come to a broad adoption.
So basically the immaturity is not doing the industry any good thing at the moment. So industry needs to move forward with more mature modules on NFE. Yeah, okay. Clear message. Thanks a lot, Dirk. So I think we are
we're just
consumed our 50 minutes.
Yep.
Okay, so guys, the inputs are still building up, but it goes quite at the same level. Huh? So interesting reading. So our next use case and the final use case before the break, guys. So you're gonna get some opportunity to re-energize. Is gonna be Itential. So our CTO of the panel session, and I think Christopher, you're gonna talk about platform versus applications, and this is going to be more of an open conversation.
Yeah, I want to do something a little different. We're going to get some questions out of the audience, hopefully. So, I think the customer sessions over the last 2 days have really reinforced. We think about what we've automated. I mean, we're wireline, wireless, cable, telco, data center, application, policy, firewall, ACL. So we picked a load balancer as the example, but I just think when we talk about the numbers of use cases that we've automated, and the maturity of the platforms these days, I think we can all be proud of it. When we talk about platforms, I think we get very aggressive in the any service, any operational model, any integration, and I would like to hear from y'all in the sense that there's a lot of desire for end-to-end applications, right? So we have small teams building platforms, and our customers collectively are asking for, we talked about migrations, we talked about order entry, we talked about workflow, we've talked about provisioning into the network. Really, how do we collectively build an ecosystem around these applications that can take the constituent parts and really bring something that's a little bit pre-baked that we can take to market in a more concise way. So we're never going to abandon the fact that we're going to be a platform approach. We can bring anything and automate it, but I think we're seeing consistent, repeatable use cases. We're talking about common data models this morning. I'd like Ender to make a comment maybe about function packs and how that might fit in. But I think whether it's the DevNet community, common data models, core function packs, and these reusable applications, I think we have the opportunity to really create around a community for us to have some reusable aspects that we can take and share amongst ourselves. So definitely want your feedback. Definitely would like your questions. Maybe if you flip to the next one and we can come back to it.
Yep.
The only comment I wanted to make is when I think about an application, I think one thing that really, from a couple customer examples, really changed how I thought about this was we had core teams building automations. And once we exposed that capability out to the end customer, we sometimes call it an intake form. So somebody who's requesting a firewall request, somebody who's requesting a load balancer, they can see immediately where that request is. They can see, it used to be, I email a spreadsheet and 5 days later I find out if I get a hole punched in my firewall. Now I can actually see that path already exists. I don't have to wait for 5 days, and given that compute and storage is immediate, I can start working tomorrow. So it's not just the automation and reduction of OpEx, but now my end user's experience is so much better because they have that immediate response, and once they have an API, they can integrate it within whatever process they have. So very interested in what you guys see are those use cases. If DevNet is the place and is sufficient, and kind of
so maybe we can ask a very clear question, so Christopher, to the audience, which is there a real need, guys, for you to see more packaged solutions around NSO, with eventually Netrounds, Pronghorn, some of the other solutions developed by ES and by other partners, but really pre-packaged, well-tested, so that you can almost get it off the shelf and have it implemented. So maybe that's kind of the feedback you would like to get. So can we raise hands on that maybe?
For sure, or just pass the mic if anybody's
or pass the mic if you want to comment on something.
I definitely like Ender to, I'm going to drag a question out.
Yeah, Ender, so.
So, Chris, I guess the question you're trying to ask is the balance between the platform and purpose-built use cases.
Absolutely.
And from our experience, obviously at Cisco, we're a company that takes pride in the number of solutions we market and pull through with the hardware. So it's natural for us to look at how to get these hardware solutions out to market. And NSO, in our case, was needed to automate these solutions. So we saw a good intersection between selling solutions and using NSO to automate those solutions. And we have like 3 that were mentioned earlier today morning that the BU has packaged and stood behind and is on the truck, right? And there are a couple of more that we're working on, and we see different parts of Cisco coming to the NSO team requesting to see if their solution can be automated, purpose-built, pre-packaged, and then productized. So we're seeing a lot of that. I don't think there's a filter that is applied or an easy answer to say, can it be done or not? But there's a lot of discussions going around that. So there's layers on top of NSO that obviously can be utilized, Itential, orchestrated assurance with Netrounds. So I think there's a community of these use cases that are coming at the forefront, and we're seeing quite a bit more.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Ender.
Yeah, maybe just a comment, and then I'll pass it over. So, and what we get asked for, and I think Manish said it earlier, East, West, and North, we get asked to bring off-the-shelf integrations with the rest of your IT ecosystem, right? So the integration with NSO is powerful and complex because we want to respect the model infrastructure that you've worked so hard to build, and we want to make sure that we don't put what I called earlier the candy shell on top, so we have to hard code a bunch of APIs into a model-based framework. But when it comes to the legacy systems, and I think you heard this in a lot of the customer presentations earlier, we're key value pairs, we're legacy type interfaces that don't have that kind of model-centric approach. So a lot of those can be repeatable across your ecosystem, depending upon how much you've customized it. So whereas the function packs can be embedded in NSO and it's more out of the box, from a Pronghorn perspective, we're building that integration ecosystem so your time to market can really be shrunk. That was the first thing. And the second thing is, just to repeat, the extension, I think the next wave of this automation is to extend what you've built within your ecosystem and expose that out to your customers. Any feedback on anybody that's done that and successfully and had good feedback, but I think your end user has a strong desire for that, right? So we typically solve the platform approach, and I think we see a multiplier effect when we start to expose it out to the rest of the ecosystem, either via API through these integrations or ultimately to the end user.
Yeah, so I just have a question / comment in regard to having prepackaged solutions. So maybe here we should make a distinction between the enterprise part and the service provider, since maybe in the enterprise area, we really are providing use cases that solve a certain problem. Whereas in the service provider area, I think it's on the part of the service provider who wants to be in charge of the design, the architecting, the marketing, to basically be able to have some competitive advantage. So maybe having unique prepackaged solution for everyone might not be the best choice. I'm not sure. This is just my thinking. So,
yeah. So in my experience, there are service providers that require specific, let's say, features, capabilities. Others want to, for example, to avoid the integration effort building an application and so on. They are asking for more prepackaged solutions, so especially smaller ones.
Yep.
So I think it very much depends on the size of the service provider, on the specific requirements. So there might be some overlap with enterprises, large enterprises, and I think to have some flexibility but also to offer applications would for us as system integrator would help, as well as we do specific integrations for customers to realize the requirements.
I think that's a fair comment there. So low-tier service providers, they have smaller budgets available. They would like to consume something faster and easier versus the bigger ones.
Yeah, probably. The one thing I would say is that sometimes we need to invent service models, right? We've always said that this is more of an invention. But at the same time, I think a lot of the problems we're solving around that invention have already been solved through, we've solved these in other means. So just because we need to invent the service construct and we're putting it within NSO and the platform, I still think we can revisit the rest of the ecosystem we're building and try to use reusable components and not use the fact that we need to invent a service model to necessarily create a lot of bespoke types of development around it. So that just want to differentiate between those two things.
Make one point. Sure. Just to, and Frederick knows, advanced services has lived through the pain of building from scratch every time. And this is honest, I would say, feedback that we ourselves realize there is so much reusability in the accounts, in the use cases we are doing across customer segments, as Chris said. Some of the use cases are repeatable from cable customers to wireless customers to data center to enterprise, right? The reusability factor will vary from use case to use case, from segment to segment, but I can guarantee reusability is there. Maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 40%. Like in service discovery, reusability will be low. But if it's a micro use case, like a port turnup, reusability will be 95%. So benefit is definitely there, but it varies.
Yeah. So we get a question from, and then we pass on to you. So first of all, KG, you had something to say?
Yeah, it's more comment than the question. I think we constantly get drawn in two directions, right? We get drawn between our customers wanting to have pre-built solutions that are fully kind of supported and off the shelf and cheap, of course. But of course, they don't have the same requirements, so they want their solution to be off the shelf. So I think we're all heading in the same direction here. That what we need is almost like a domain-specific language I was very. I really liked Mark Swanborough's talk earlier this morning. He made a reference to the classic textbook, The Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, where they talk about domain-specific languages. And I think as we take a very generic platform like NSO, and we build pre-packaged functionalities on top of that, like Inder was just referring to, like we have our NFEO package, we have our vBranch or Enterprise NFV package, we have our SD-WAN package, we have soon our SAE package. You know, we take these packages, and they're not complete solutions, but they form domain-specific language where you can have a high degree of usability for a specific domain. And I think that, I mean, we have to not lose the platform aspect of our offering, that we have to offer something which enables our customers, our service providers, our enterprises to differentiate and create solutions for their specific problems. But we have to create domain-specific languages which enables them to get much closer to what they need and get as much support as possible in order to create their specific solutions on top of that.
Very wise comment. Thanks a lot, KG.
So
one final question, and then we go to the Menti. So Scott, you had something?
Oh, just the addition here is, I heard maybe the key word there was cheap. When we say off the shelf, someone has to pay for it, someone has to build it and test it and support it, and so I know as a solution provider, whenever we have folks between projects, they'll pretty much go to work to kind of invest in some things that we can reuse. Because then we own the IPR. But maybe as a community, we can think about, as we do solutions or we do things, what can be released to the community, or what can be at least invested in, so that it does become cheaper when you amortize over a number of customers. So.
Yeah. You go to Menti now?
Thanks a lot, Scott. Yeah, let's go to Menti. So guys, get prepared to log into Menti and provide your answers to the question. So, and the question is, what is the most compelling automation application focus for your customers and your team? We do have a clear winner at the moment, but that could change.
I think the people have spoken.
Yeah. Is that in line with your thoughts, Chris?
I think it's core to what we've been working on, right? Yep. So yep. I think it's definitely in line. I am interested. Yeah, we can't do 5 Mentis, but it'd be very interesting in the future. Which direction everyone's headed. So maybe that's a discussion topic after. But
it may be a good idea that we keep this kind of conversation ongoing with customers, and we continuously collect feedback in this area. So it would be very useful.
For sure.
So guys,
well, I was going to say, I think we're ready for our break, Tony.
Yes, that's right.
So what I wanted to say is about 2:14, 2:15 now. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back, and then we'll hear Stefan from Netrounds, and we'll hear Manish from Cisco Advanced Services. So let's do quickly. Let's do about a 10-minute break and get back.
Thanks a lot, guys. We have 2 other interesting discussions that we would like to get started on. And the first is going to be with Stefan Vallin from Netrounds, who is one of our Solution Plus partners that has been closely working with us on very unique use cases that have to do with orchestrated assurance. And I think you're going to discuss some details around that, Stefan.
Yep.
So maybe one of the first questions to get the conversation going, that is, what does automated closed-loop troubleshooting and healing actually means for you? And how would you like to convey that message to the customers in the audience?
After 50 minutes, you'll have the answer. But the short answer is the following, and it goes back to Chris's presentation this morning that, okay, NSO provisioned the service, and in many cases, you stop there, and then the next day, the operations team wakes up, oh, there's something new in the network, maybe we should monitor it. So the gap between provisioning and assurance needs to be removed. That's the basic thing, and I was glad to see Christian using that self-test service. My colleagues here remember that self-test was introduced in NCS 1.0 at 2011. So that's really the trick. When you provision the service, you need to test it, and that should be done in the activation phase. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, I mean, we're networking people here, but most of us are using assurance systems focused on IT. We're collecting traps and syslogs from devices and trying to make some magic out of that. That's for IT, that's for servers, that's for applications, but we're provisioning network services, so we need to assure the network. And we're doing a couple of bad things. Reusing IT-focused assurance systems. So test the service and monitor the network. I think that's the trick. And maybe I will connect to the picture back on me here. It's very interesting. Well, you can always read different reports, you can get different numbers, but I'm pretty sure I'm not lying that if you look at end users and the number of tickets you have, is that about 70% of the network problems are reported by end users and not by your assurance systems. You can object, raise your hands and say, no, we have the perfect assurance systems. Our assurance system shows red lamps for 99% of the problems before the end users. And I will question you if that is true. But so it's kind of interesting. And the quotes you have there are from customers that has approached us. And I think the top number one is that our users, if you're an enterprise, or our customers, report issues before we detect them. And you probably have spent $millions on assurance systems, but still you don't detect the problems, the users do, and that's kind of weird. Another customer said, well, we tried to measure uptime, but our customers are reporting uptime in a different way. Why? Well, because they're somewhere else. They're not in the basement where the IT systems are. They are out on the campus on a wireless network. So the uptime there is, of course, different than your SNMP trap receiver in the basement, right? And going back to some, we're networking guys, and we need to measure the network quality. So if I promised quality of service in 3 different classes to my customer, we should measure that, and the traps won't tell you. So we need to have network KPIs delivered by the assurance systems. Also going back to Christian's points this morning, and we don't test the services when we provision them. Maybe we're doing a manual ping maybe. That needs to be greatly improved. So if we move to the next slide there.
So maybe Stefan, can I ask an intermediate question? So how many of the services that are being activated to customers actually are not activated, you think, in the right way? They're not delivered the right quality from the start?
That's, first of all, I mean, if you use NSO, the service is provisioned the right way. But what we tend to forget is that the configuration that NSO writes can be perfectly correct, but the service still doesn't work. Also goes back to what you see in the back of me here. Because as a user of a network service, I'm at one point, and maybe far away there are a couple of data centers where I have my applications, and the way from those data centers and those applications all the way to my office over wireless networks. There's so many things on the way that can go wrong, and NSO is in control of maybe 30%, 60%, 70%, but there are things outside control that are not okay. So going from the left to right, it can be the data center interconnect, it can be the internet connections, the wide area connections, it could be the firewall rules, it can be the quality of service within the wired network, it can be the signal strength of your wireless network. So all those things at the end is what's delivered to me. And to capture that with fault management and performance management, looking at counters and syslogs along the way, just won't work. No. So the magic trick. So how do we actually go there? some of the people here know that I'm an old grumpy guy, and I'm kind of fed up with some terms like telemetry and big data and machine learning, and thinking, well, along that path you see behind me here, if we just collect even more data and we rename our trap receiver to a telemetry receiver, and we call our correlation engine big data, suddenly we will get the picture of the end-to-end service from an end customer point of view, and I don't think that'll work. Sorry for that. So what we do with orchestrated assurance is to move away from the management plane, because all of those attempts are using the management plane to do assurance. I think we should go back to the data plane. So in orchestrated assurance, what we focus on is inject traffic at the data plane, as a user, layer 1 to layer 7, measure the KPIs directly, and that's very cheap compared to a big data project. It's very cheap to inject traffic and measure KPIs directly. And then you get the whole path here, because you're sending the traffic one way, gets reflected the other way, and then you have the KPIs directly out of the box. Then you can measure the network quality from an end customer perspective. And that's what we're doing here, tying that together with NSO. So NSO provisions the service. The first thing NSO does in the self-test method is to initiate active traffic along the path, and then back, once that has passed, it actually starts then active monitoring, so carefully sending packets back and forth in this path continuously to proactively detect. And
you can do that at various load levels, I guess,
yes.
So to do some regression testing, yeah.
Yeah. So that's at the heart of it. Yeah. So you guys here in the audience, when you do assurance, interested to hear, how many of you here actually have network assurance where you do inject traffic at the data plane, or do you just collect the data from the management plane? So data plane, synthetic traffic, hands up. 2. Okay. The rest of you, there are ways to improve. Any questions at this point? Comment here?
I think you just discovered your opportunity in the market.
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide. The term orchestrated assurance was coined by Netrounds and Cisco. I don't remember the exact year, a couple of years ago, where we did a POC together with in Etsy. It was a little bit NFV oriented because it was Etsy NFV group, but it also illustrates the main idea of orchestrated assurance. The basic principle: tie assurance and fulfillment together. So on the top you see here, NSO provisions the service, but please implement that self-test method Christian talked about this morning. So, next slide.
Is that right or no?
No, the next one.
Next one?
Yep. There you go.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mats.
Very attentive.
Still the right slide. So NSO provisions the service, writes the configuration, commit OK. Normally you stop there, but that's the bug number 1. You shouldn't stop there, because once the configuration is committed, you should implement the self-test method. So the config was okay, but do the service really work end-to-end? And here you need to be smart. And the ping is not okay, because you promised the customer 3 different quality of service levels. You need to test all those 3. You need to test the loss, the jitter, the delay, all the way to the customer site. And you need to have something. It's easy to have the self-test method in the Jain data model, but what API call can you make? It's very hard to do that API call to router in the network. So you need some kind of tool out there that can do the test. And one example is of course Netrounds, because that gives you the possibility with one API call to test that traffic all the way back and forth. So that's number 1 then. And number 2 then, if that says yes, from within the automated process, here's the second trick. Don't just manually call the assurance guys, or as you usually do, you don't even call them. As part of the fulfillment process, also trigger active assurance so that the service is really monitored. Because if you talk in many cases, the service you provision is not in all cases also monitored by the assurance systems. You need to automate that binding. It's a bug not to automate that binding between fulfillment and assurance. And what I'm going to show you then in the demo is that with that in place, you can do two really good tricks. Question to the audience: what is the most common underlying problem in a network? If I have performance issues in the network, what is the most common problem? Shown by numerous reports. More than 50% of network performance issues is what?
Any takers? Suggestions?
The annoying answer is a non-optimal configuration somewhere. Do alarm systems detect a non-optimal configuration somewhere in the network? Is that a trap? Is that a syslog? Non-optimal config? I haven't seen it. So that's really annoying. But now again, if we automated the provisioning with NSO, we have automated active monitoring, we will get an SLA violation, and we have NSO in place. So what's the first thing we will do here in the automated process? We have a network issue. The service is not behaving properly. You NSO experts in the room, what is the automatic button you press to fix that most common issue in networks? Non-optimal config somewhere, out-of-band config. Redeploy. So up there, you just redeploy, and I will show that in the demo. Exactly. That will solve 50% of your problems. If the config is in reach of NSO. I mean, that's the problem. It might be outside NSO, but in many cases. That will solve most of the problems. Then there are other problems that you can detect if you have active monitoring in place. You will detect the SLA issue, but the redeploy won't fix it. What you can do still is, when you have NSO in place and something like Netrounds in place, that you can trigger automatic troubleshooting. So your network engineers today, they do ping, they do trace routes to sort of try to isolate the problem. That's what you can automate as well. There's no magic in automating that. And automating ping and trace routes and other tools gives you much more money for the dollars than investing in a big data platform, to be honest. And I'm going to show that in the demo as well.
Great stuff, Stefan. So I think we have about 2 more minutes. So maybe we can move to the Menti question.
That'd be good. Frederick, if we could go.
So guys, please get on to Menti. Look at the question, which is automated end-to-end service turn-up testing part of your service activation process? And there's 3 options that you can reply to. Interesting build-up. So you're going to get some interesting discussions at the tabletop, Stefan. Yeah. Looking at the middle bar.
Yeah, yeah, because I think that the middle bar is crucial. I mean, yep. Again, as Christian, thank you again, Christian, for preaching. I mean, it's kind of amazing. If we're software engineers, a software engineer building a software module, is that guy allowed to check in without a test case in your organization? No, probably not. But in provisioning, we are allowed to provision a service without testing that service. That's kind of weird these days.
Yeah, so from the panel, any other takers around orchestrated assurance, your experience you want to share with the audience? I know that we are just at the top of the 50 minutes, but a quick interaction. All good? All right, so thanks a lot, Stefan. So let's move on to the next and final use case topic that we're going to cover this afternoon as part of the panel expert interactions. And this is going to be Manish Jain from Cisco S. Is going to cover mobility. And the typical use cases that Manish and his team has been seeing with mobile operators or with other operators in the mobility context. So the first question to you, Manish, would be, what are the typical use cases for mobility and wireless customers that you have been seeing so far as you are doing those engagements with customers?
Thanks, Tony, for the question. And as I answer this question, I just want to capture a market trend as well. If you look at NSO deployments globally, almost all the wireless mobility deployments have taken place in Americas. Trend is catching up with other two regions, but if you take the current inventory, all the operators are from Americas. And the good thing is NSO has a footprint in all the tier 1, tier 2 wireless carriers in Americas. So having said that, we have been asked, like, how can we repeat these use cases in other two regions? And we take a step back and say, what are those top use cases for these wireless carriers where we have deployed NSO and automation solutions? So if you look at 2x2 matrix, I would say the first bucket is the service automation. And there is a nuance for that. And literally, it is very similar to any other layer 2, layer 3 VPN. But let's say there is a terminology APN, access point name. And same thing, all the CRUD operations, you create service, you delete service, you change service, you associate, firewall rules associated with it. You have, different type of access circuits to it, whether it's IPsec, whether it's GRE. So all those things are very similar, but still it's a high volume, transaction which needs to be automated. So that's service activation. And another thing which we have seen again and again is PCRF. That's policy and charging function, and Cisco has a product to it. So we have automated all the policy and charging rules with NSO. So that's again the service automation. The second thing which we are seeing in other, I would say, segments of service provider and enterprise customers is as simple as capacity activation on infrastructure automation, which is literally, day 0 onboarding of the device, and then day 1 and day 2 configs. What I mean by day 0, day 1, day 2 is like initial config of the device, like basic, connectivity, like management interface, SNMP, syslog kind of templates. And then day 1 is, like routing you apply, routing and so on, connectivity. And then day 2 is where you do like ongoing firewall, load balancing kind of rules. So if you look at from the mobility lens, it's the same step, but the nodes are different. Here you have mobility nodes like the SAE gateway, like PCRF, right? But still it's the same configuration. So that's all infrastructure automation. The third kind of a bucket is all about operations automation. And again, operations automation, we have been talking like migration use case was covered, right? That's an example of operations automation. Config compliance, right? The ACL management and the load balancer configuration, which Chris mentioned, that's also operations automation. We are seeing a big adoption of OS upgrade, right? So how often operations team do the upgrade of the operating system? And again, the steps may be simple or complex. We have seen, let's say, a tier 3, tier 4 SP where you have 20 to 25 steps in a MOP for doing an OS upgrade. But let's say a tier 1 SP may have 150 to 200 steps to automate. And there are some valid data points in like the efficiency gain by doing this operations automation. And the last bucket, as it was captured in the NFV use case, instead of physical devices, you have virtual images, but the step remains the same, where it's day 0, day 1, day 2 config. But in addition, you onboard the NFVI or the infrastructure, whether it's OpenStack, whether it's VMware, and then you spin up the VNFs with VNF manager like ESC. So those are, I would say, that's the classification, Tony, of these automation use cases. And one data point I want to say, as I mentioned, in Americas, like top 1 or 2 customers, maybe they start with one category, but then they realize the value of NSO as a platform, and they themselves discover the use case. For example, a tier 1 carrier in US, they started with infrastructure and service automation. Another line of business, same customer, they started with mop automation. Another line of business, same customer, they started on the VNF automation with like interoperable NFEO and the VNF manager. So you see all these possibilities. And just to wrap up this use cases, Frederick and some of us were in New York when we were hosting similar DevOps conference in New York. These were the data points made in public. By using these automated use cases, they have done like 30 times improvement, for example, doing the mop automation for iOS upgrade. The migration use case, right? It used to take them 45 maintenance window. Now they are doing the same migration in one maintenance window with 2 operators. So these are clear examples of automation for these mobility use cases.
Hey, thanks a lot, Manish. So maybe an additional question onto that, so that tier 1 operator in the US. So we talked before about the journey to automation. And you just mentioned like 4 use cases, or 4 ways that customer has been able to move towards new automation opportunities. So how long has that took the customer to walk that journey?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, Tony. And it's both good and bad, to be honest, right? These customers, we started this journey about 2.5 years and 3 years back. But that's bad part, it's like long. But the good part is, customer is doing it in phases, right? Again, as Tony mentioned, automation is a journey. You prioritize use cases, you take these use cases into production in 4 months, 6 months, and then you go to the second kind of use case. So even though we are into phase 6, phase 7 with these service provider, but they themselves are finding more use cases to be automated, and they are seeing value in the platform.
Yeah, great, thanks a lot. Yeah, please go ahead.
So I think I heard you say that fundamentally it's the same, their network devices, if they have NEDs, if they have, because I think that's our experience too. We did a project in mobility, and as far as, I didn't do it, so I asked about it, and all the pieces sounded just like regular NSO, activities and service development and interfacing. So maybe, that should be the message. Right? It's if you're a mobility provider or a wireless carrier, don't think that this isn't for you. It is, and it can be, because really it's as long as you have the NEDs and the basics there with NSO, then guess what? It does apply.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And to that point, and what Chris mentioned about applications. So we ourselves have realized there is a reusability of these mobility use cases to other segments as well. For example, OS upgrade. I mean, at the end of the day, you are going to pick the new OS image and push into the device. Does it matter whether it's a Star OS or iOS or OS XR? There are some changes, but literally you are doing an OS upgrade. So we are building, AS is also investing in building this reusable packages, and you will see the demo later. But the point is, same use case can be used across segments.
I guess also for orchestrated assurance in the mobility space, Stefan, same use cases can apply as to wireline operators. Yeah. So any other comments around mobility from your experiences, guys? So maybe another question for you then. So a lot of service providers, at least we see momentum happening, are investing into 5G. How you see automation getting involved into that and the evolution of automation into 5G environments?
Yeah, I mean, as Cisco, we are responding to many RFPs and RFIs for 5G. And the good thing is with NSO, with NFEO package, we have our basics covered for 5G. As you, Jim, if you can go to the next slide, please. As you look into the architecture principles of 5G, right, it's all about common themes which we are seeing today with NFV, with SDN, with separation of controller and user plane, with moving more computing towards the edge. So if you see, right, the automation will be the key. Automation is the key because it's all about controlling the policies, doing real-time automation. And as Stefan mentioned, we should not forget the closed loop automation, right? If you look at the network slicing use case that was mentioned, that is the biggest use case in 5G. And network slicing is nothing but creating the dedicated lanes for different kinds of traffic. For example, IoT may have different profile than a automated car or automated, virtual reality kind of application. So every service has a different profile, but you share the same physical infrastructure, but you create your own virtual lane. And that is all provision with a solution like NSO. And on the closed loop automation, you have to keep monitoring the performance. And as again, Stefan mentioned, it's not just about the kind of a reactive monitoring with syslog and SNMP. You should be looking at the data or the bearer traffic. So that all comes handy for this.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Manish. So
we're
maybe
about 5 more minutes.
Menti,
Here we
what do you
go.
think, Jim?
Frederick, yeah, can we go to the Menti question? And I think you have one more slide, by the way.
Yeah, so guys, please log on to Menti again and use the code. So the question is, in which mobile functional area do you see the biggest automation and orchestration challenges? So if you can get onto Menti and then provide your inputs.
And Tony, as we're taking input, I believe Manish has one more slide as well.
Yeah. It's like two very clear concerns there, Manish.
Yeah, Anthony, I would agree. I mean, many service providers, I would say even though they started with physical, but they are moving to virtual. So we have seen a trend, it's kind of you have to do both physical and virtual.
Yeah.
So the end-to-end service configuration need will remain whether the devices are physical or virtual.
Yeah.
Thanks for the answer.
Okay, thanks for the inputs, guys. So, Jim, I think we can move to the final slide of Manish.
Yeah, Manish, go ahead and go to your final slide.
Yeah, so
this is a summary slide, and I think Frederick would also relate to this. This also came from the developer conference in New York, and it's nothing about mobility. It applies to everybody, who is tackling automation with NSO, without NSO. And the question Frederick and Nicholas and we asked in New York to all of our customers, and we had about 8 to 10 customers in the room, like, what were you thinking when you were making a decision to adopt NSO or any automation solution? So we asked them very specific questions, like, can you, step back and see what you could have done better, or what were you thinking? And the second pillar is, as you were implementing NSO, what you could have done better, or what went wrong, or what's the feedback to Cisco. And the last stage is, as you are looking to find more and more use cases for automation, what's the lesson learned, or what's the feedback for Cisco? So I just want to highlight a few points here. In the initial cycle, when customers are looking for automation, the point is, you have to prioritize use cases. You cannot take whole lot of use cases and expect to be fully automated in 3 months, 6 months. And to be honest, customer is not successful, Cisco is not successful if the use case does not go into production. So we have to select subset of the use cases, push them to production, and then take more use cases. The second stage is implementation. I think there was a session on the testing and automated CI/CD tools. And again, I think in the last developer conference also you heard, it's not just about provisioning. It's like taking the CI/CD to NetOps, because CI/CD has been more on the IT side, but with platform like NSO, where you are doing the releases of service packages, or the nets are coming so often, you have to adopt CI/CD in the network automation. And on the last pillar, where you are already thinking about expansion, day 2 operations is must, because sometimes, as you know, the service packages, they are written in Python, and initially they were written in Java. Network engineers are they are still getting to this like building the packages, but the point is you need a dedicated support for ongoing operations. So those are the key, I would say, best practices I would like to call as you take the journey for automation.
Right, great. Thanks a lot, Manish. So
we're at time. So I'll So first of all, thanks our panelists here. A great session today. So I'd like to give them a round of applause if we could. But
thanks, guys.
But they're actually not done in a way. So what's happening is it's 3 o'clock now. So from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, the other team will be available up at the tabletop. So we really want you to go and ask your questions or ask for any amplification you would have. At 4 o'clock, we're going to come back and we're going to have 2 demos. One will be Chris's team will be showing Pronghorn. And after that, we're going to have Stefan showing Netrounds. So from 3 to 4, ask your questions up there, get some coffee, do whatever, but make sure you follow up with our panelists, and then make sure you're here for 4 to 5 for the 2 demo rounds. And then at that point, Tony, you'll give a wrap up around close to 5 o'clock.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you, Jim.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, guys, again.